Greetings from the center of Canada and welcome to the Fringe Faithful Collective. My name is Mike Powell and this is article episode number 10, entitled Who We Consider the Spiritual Gatekeepers of the Church to Be in Our Contemporary Global Multi-Denominational Context, and Why. The year was 1995. My best friend Jeff and I were in Toronto at a hotel near Pearson International Airport because there was a convention scheduled that day relating to our favorite television show. Because neither of us had a driver's license yet, my parents had dropped us off and prearranged a pickup time. So we headed toward the escalator that would bring us into the conference room. But as we were about to step aboard, the man standing at the base of the ascending stairs asked for our tickets, which we didn't have. We had falsely assumed admission could be purchased when we got to the venue, and when we asked where we could get tickets, the bouncer told us that the event was sold out. Dejected, we wandered slowly through the lobby toward the exit, supposing that our day was ruined. That is, until we met someone who providentially had a red pen. As with most entrants to concerts or events, when people legitimately pay for access, hands are stamped to allow for ticketless re-entry. With nothing to lose, we carefully inscribed the word confidential on the back of our hands and made our way to a staircase where a different security guard was posted. As casually as we could, we started climbing the steps, only to hear a commanding and interrogative voice say, "Tickets?" Not one who's instinctively quick to respond shrewdly. My reply was confidently swift and complete with subterfuge. Moving down a few steps toward the watchman with my arm outstretched, I said, "Do you need to see our stamps?" Fortunately for us, the guy waved us past without looking too closely at the counterfeit branding on our skin. And that's how we got into the X-Files convention, for free. However, this reflection isn't about Mulder, Scully, or some not yet discovered elusive truth that's out there somewhere. What I'd like to consider in this article episode is how what we do know, or suppose we know, is regulated by those who share a Christian heritage or faith. What I'm referring to, of course, is who in the church should be seen or recognized as its official spokespeople. With the ever-expanding popularity of blogs, podcasts, and general accessibility to a diversity of content via the internet over the past decade or so, as exemplified by an article posted on the Christianity Today website in April 2017, it's also clear that there's a growing unease in the ecclesial realm of those who feel particularly threatened by unofficial voices who have gained a significant following. I can specifically remember where I was and what I was doing when I read the post labeled "Who's in Charge of the Christian Blogosphere?" because it was the only time to date that I've deleted a tweet from my Twitter account mere minutes after writing it. In a moment of weakness, I responded in an unloving, unconstructive fashion, and as an ordained pastor at the time, I was supposed to be setting a better example. Let's just say that I was and continue to be incensed by the words that could best be described as a reactionary editorial designed to generate suspicion about and fear of those who don't occupy the quote-unquote correct positions of authority in the evangelical world. But what saddened me the most was the brazen way this magazine had strategically asked a female ordained priest to flagrantly censure fellow women who have an online followership, in particular female bloggers like Jen Hatmaker, for purportedly acting outside the boundaries of the church's jurisdiction. In her own words, at the beginning of the article, Tish Harrison Warren wrote, "Just as the invention of the printing press helped spark the Protestant Reformation and created a crisis of authority, the advent of social media has catalyzed a new crisis in the church." Terms like accountability, credentialing, endorsement, hierarchy, influence, oversight, responsibility, superintendence, and the like followed in quick succession, making it manifestly clear that there's a vested interest on behalf of specific people and factions within the church to restrict and control authority, which is a word that was used by Harrison Warren no less than 20 times in a relatively short piece of writing, as aptly conveyed by Rage Against the Machine in the song Mic Check.
Who got the power? That's been my question. The mass of the few in this tornation. The priest, the book, or the congregation.
Granted, I understand why people are habitually concerned about doctrine and orthodoxy, especially if one happens upon a divergence or disagreement, theologically speaking. After all, aren't there warnings in the Bible about false teachers for a reason? Sure. And I, for one, am not persuaded that anyone, regardless of who they are, should occupy key positions of sway or command in Christian circles. The greater question for me, however, is how we determine who should have a voice. The problem is that it's just not as unambiguous as we would like it to be. I would venture to suggest that most Christians see authority as linked, grounded, or connected to one's understanding of God. Correspondingly, if God is believed to have said something, that speech, message, or revelation is reasonably taken to be valid, binding, or compelling. Therefore, if someone is a follower of God and some kind of reality has been disclosed to them, whereby they are committed to a particular way of life that guides their thinking, speech, and actions, they could be said to be acting as God's representatives, emissaries, or ambassadors. But is everyone then a prophet who speaks and acts on God's behalf by virtue of saying to Jesus, Lord, Lord? And what about how people read Scripture? Especially among neo-evangelical individuals and communities, the Bible is often assumed to be unequivocally clear, without contradiction, and every word is taken to have a one-to-one correspondence with what God thinks. What's more, if ever there is variance in how a particular text is interpreted, it's curious how certain people consistently arrive at the conclusion that they are, in fact, the faithful remnant. In other words, the presumption is that they are conclusively unable to misinterpret Scripture or to be adversely affected by any sort of confirmation bias. What this unfailingly results in is scapegoating those who don't agree with their perspective. Accordingly, if ever something surfaces that contradicts or questions the sanctioned position of this or that group, there's customarily a felt need to immediately and vehemently defend conventional convictions against what might be labeled as dangerous ideas or heresy. But who exactly are the legitimate gatekeepers of the church and its beliefs? Practically speaking, the way I see things is that there's both an individual and a communal dimension. On one hand, there's the personal responsibility that one might feel to defend the faith, which includes both those in authorized positions of governance, for example, biblical scholars, priests, pastors, ministers, denominational leaders, etc., as well as so-called lay people, in other words, those who attend or volunteer their time at a local church or who generally consider themselves to be Christians. To say the same thing differently, there are some people who are trained and at times paid to act in an official leadership capacity, and others who are not formally spokespeople for any particular Christian organization. The challenge here is to weigh between the comments of those who presume upon their authorized or professional role, and those who assume they should be listened to simply because they read the Bible. On the other hand, the Judeo-Christian story has always been community-centered, and as much as it's important for one to personally own their faith, living it out is never a completely solitary venture. Though individuals sometimes take it upon themselves to act unilaterally, there's something to be said of that great cloud of witnesses that the unnamed author mentions in Hebrews 12, verse 1. About this, when considering any single person's writing or teaching, it's helpful to consider both how our foreparents in faith understood things, as well as what liberating movement God might be seeking to spark in the present. Because tradition does have its place as a spiritual inheritance that we have the privilege of passing down to future generations. It serves to remind one another of the collective memories that are intended to guide our spiritual life together as a community. That being said, remembrance is indeed a sacred duty. Still, I would equally contend that God may very well be endeavoring to accomplish some new things in and through us today, which a dead orthodoxy could never give rise to, as per the last article episode. All this to say, who do I think the contemporary gatekeepers of the church ought to be? To be honest, I don't consider my opinion on the matter to be of much consequence. I'm only one individual among the countless number of people who have ever come before, who presently exist, and who are yet to come. But while I was listening to a song the other day, namely Trouble in the Empire by David Benjamin Blower, an image came to mind that might provide us with some guidance. The lyrics were these.
Trouble with the monsters, or souls to keep. Trouble with the shepherds, get fat on the sheep. Yeah!
This is a direct allusion to a passage in Ezekiel 34, where the prophet critiqued the spiritual leaders of the day concerning their taking advantage of or profiting off those under their care. Likewise, perhaps when considering what a person has written or said, it's a good principle to ask whether they are somehow benefiting from the oppression, subjugation, or attempted control of another individual or group, for example, superiority, fame, financial gain, etc. Ultimately, however, what I'm sincerely wondering is whether God needs or wants us to hastily come to God's defense. Because any time I've ever seen gatekeeping, spiritual policing, or chastisement in action, either as the inquisitor, the inquisited, or as a bystander to inquisition, it doesn't end well. Plus, coming back to Ezekiel, it's not only apparent that we are all complete letdowns whenever we take on the role of a shepherd ourselves. In that same passage, as demonstrated with a prolonged series of I will statements, it goes on to say that God has committed to do all that we people fail to accomplish. Unsurprisingly, many years later, Jesus made statements like, I am the gate, and I am the good shepherd, which might give us a clue as to whose responsibility it actually is to preserve, uphold, and safeguard the things of God. And, spoiler alert, maybe it's not us. Peace and love, sisters and brothers.